The thin cry of a baby cut across the Texas dust and climbed the porch steps of Crow Ranch. Silas Crow stood there, coffee turning cold in his hand, as a stranger walked through his open gate. She was tall and narrow in a faded blue dress, boots wired back together, dust in her dark hair. In her arms she carried a baby bundled in flour sack cloth, the small face flushed from heat. Silas did not move to meet her. He was 52, broad-shouldered, hands ruined by work, his face carved deep by wind and years. 7 years earlier he had buried his wife on the hill beyond the house, and since then silence had been his only partner. If this story is touching your heart already, let me know in the comments where you are watching from and if you have ever gone through something similar. Also, tell me what you would like me to improve in future stories. That same morning, his last ranch hands had quit. They rode out before sunrise, leaving rolled blankets in the bunks and a rough note pinned to the rail, saying they were done eating burned beans and rock-hard bread until he found a real cook. Silas had crushed the note in his fist. He knew cattle and horses and broken fence. What he did not know was how to make food that kept men at his table. So he had ridden into the little town of Redemption, gone inside the general store, and tacked a small notice to the board. In slow letters he had written, "Cook wanted. Crow Ranch. Fair wages, hard work, no complaining." By afternoon he was back on the north fence line, alone under a white-hot sky. Wire had sagged where posts had shifted. His hands stung where barbs bit skin, but the pull of work was easier to bear than the weight behind his ribs. He did not hear the stranger's steps. One moment there was only the creak of pulled wire. The next, when he straightened, she was there, standing by the next post. She looked like someone who had walked a long road, skin browned by the sun, eyes tired and steady on his face. The baby in her arms shifted and made a soft, weak sound. The woman spoke first. Her voice was low and rough. She asked if he was Silas Crow. He told her that he was. She said she had seen his paper in town and had come for the job. He asked if she could cook. She said she could. He asked if anyone could vouch for her, if she had any letter or name. She said she had 2 hands that worked and a head full of recipes that had kept men going in rough places. That was all the proof she carried. The baby fussed again. She shifted the bundle higher, one hand rubbing small circles on the tiny back. It told him more about her than any paper could. He asked if she planned to cook with a baby tied to her. She said she had done harder things with less help and that this would not stop her from doing the work. The way she said it cut through his doubt. Silas knew what people looked like when they were close to breaking, but he also saw a straight line in her back that did not bend. He asked her name. She said her name was May Wilder. The baby was Emma, and Emma went wherever May went. Silas nodded once. He told her the terms without dressing them up. $30 a month, room and board, 3 meals a day for however many hands he had. There were none now, but there would be, if the food was worth staying for. She would keep the stove hot, the shelves in order, and the cookhouse clean. May said hard work did not scare her. He asked one last question. He wanted to know if there was a husband somewhere who might come looking for her. Her face went still, and her eyes sharpened. She said no, no husband, no man behind her. For Silas, that answer was enough. He pointed toward the cluster of buildings in the distance. The cookhouse sat against the south wall of the main house, a square room with a stove and a small bedroom tacked on. He told her she could have that room. She asked when he wanted her to begin. He told her that supper came at sundown. May hitched Emma higher on her shoulder. For the first time, the tight set of her mouth eased. She said she would start now if he would show her the way. The cookhouse met her like a dare. Grease clung to the stove, the work table was stained, and the air smelled of old, burned food. May did not waste breath on complaint. She found a wooden crate in the corner, lined it with her thin shawl, and laid Emma inside where she could see her. The baby worn out from the road, closed her eyes and went under. While Silas carried water from the well, May rolled up her sleeves. She asked if there was bacon that had not spoiled, potatoes in the root cellar, and any eggs from the hens. He answered, feeling strangely on trial. May said she would have supper on the table when the sun touched the far ridge, and that he would hear her call. At the doorway he paused. He told her there was a basin and pitcher in the little back room, filled with fresh water if she wanted to wash. Silas stepped back into the glare. The house, the empty bunkhouse, the dry pasture all lay just as they had that morning. Yet the place felt different, as if a door he had nailed shut 7 years ago had shifted on its hinges. A tired woman with a baby had walked into his silence. Whether he wanted it or not, May Wilder had already started to change Crow Ranch. By sundown, the worst of the heat had broken, and a new smell moved over Crow Ranch. The cookhouse no longer carried the bitter sting of burned beans. It smelled like coffee, bacon, and fresh bread. Silas caught it at the barn door and stopped. For 7 years he had eaten because a man had to, not because anything on his plate called him. This smell called him. Light spilled from the open cookhouse door. Inside, May moved between stove and table, sleeves rolled, hair damp at the neck, working with the steady ease of someone who knew how to fight hunger with a skillet. She told him to wash at the basin like it was the most natural thing in the world. He obeyed, then turned and saw the table, 1 plate, 1 cup, 1 fork, eggs with onion, bacon brown but not burned, potatoes fried crisp at the edge, a slice of bread still steaming beside a scrap of butter. He sat slowly and asked if she would eat. May said she would eat after him and reminded him he paid her to cook, not to sit. Silas stood again, found another plate, and slid half the food onto it. He told her anyone who worked in his kitchen ate at his table. For a moment they only looked at one another. He saw pride that hated taking more than it earned, and a deep tiredness behind her eyes. She saw a hard man who had just given up half his supper without thinking twice. May gave one small nod and sat across from him. She picked up her fork like she was taking an exam she meant to pass. The first bite almost undid him. Simple food, but done right. Warm bread, the bite of salt and fat, the clear taste of someone trying. They ate in quiet that did not feel dead. It felt like rest. Emma fussed from the crate. May pushed back her chair, but Silas told her to finish. He said the baby was only complaining a little and could wait 1 more minute. May hesitated, then listened. She cleaned her plate, then lifted her daughter and carried her into the small back room. While she settled the baby with soft words, Silas washed the plates. The sound of May's low voice and Emma's small breaths reached places inside him he had sealed shut since Catherine died. At the doorway, he thanked her for the meal. She answered that cooking was what he paid her for. He told her good work still deserved thanks and that she had done real well that day. Then he stepped out into a red-streaked sky that suddenly seemed less empty. Before dawn, May woke to a new sound by her bed. Someone had brought in an old wooden cradle and lined it with a folded blanket. The wood smelled of cedar. The care behind it smelled like hope. She stood a moment with her hand on the rail, letting the small gift steady her, then washed, changed Emma, laid her in the cradle, and went to the kitchen. The ranch was quiet. No men yet, only cattle shifting, a restless rooster, and wind in the dry grass. May lit the lamps, coaxed the banked fire back to life, and started coffee from the good tin she had found in the pantry. She mixed biscuit dough, cut rounds, set them in a Dutch oven. Bacon hit the pan, then eggs. She scraped the drippings into a small pot, added flour and milk, and worked it into thick gravy while her mind counted how long each sack would last. When Silas stepped in with his hair wet from the pump, he halted again. The table held biscuits, bacon, eggs, potatoes, and a full pot of coffee. He asked if she cooked like this every morning. May said she cooked like this when people were expected to work until dark. Something close to a smile pulled at his mouth. He sat and ate until the hard knot of hunger in him finally eased. As he finished, she handed him a folded scrap from her apron. On it she had written flour, sugar, salt, coffee, beans, lard, baking powder, and a few other staples. She told him that if he wanted real meals, the pantry needed more than chance and scraps. He agreed, slid the paper into his shirt, and said he would ride to Redemption for supplies and to hire new hands. Then, with her eyes on her cup, she asked for one more thing, a little cotton cloth and a mild soap fit for a baby's skin. She offered to pay for them from her wages. Silas thought of Emma's thin clothes and May's worn dress. He told her the cloth and soap would come out of wages he already owed, not as a debt she carried. By noon he was back with sacks and crates. When he opened the pantry he saw scrubbed shelves, spoiled food gone, jars and tins lined in neat rows. May had turned a careless storeroom into a working heart for the ranch. He carried in the new flour and sugar while she pointed out where each should go. Then he set a small bundle of blue cotton on the table, a bar of soft soap, and a simple nursing shawl he had picked up without quite knowing why. For a moment May could not speak. Her fingers brushed the fabric, then the shawl. Her eyes stayed dry, but something in her face shifted, as if a wall she had leaned on for years had turned out to be a door. That night the stew tasted rich, and the bread tore soft instead of shattering. The next morning, 3 lean cowboys rode in, asking about wages. May fed them bacon, eggs, biscuits, and strong coffee. By the time their plates were clean, all 3 had agreed to stay. Word spread fast. Folks in town said the hard widower at Crow Ranch had found himself a real cook. Men who had sworn never to work for him again suddenly rode out to ask if there was room in the bunkhouse. Within a week, the beds were full. Long boards in the cookhouse filled at every meal. May fed them all, moving from stove to table with Emma tied against her back in a sling sewn from an old flour sack. She learned each man without prying. One needed extra coffee and less grease. One could not handle peppers. The youngest burned through food like fire through dry grass, so she slipped more onto his plate whenever she passed. Silas watched his ranch slowly change. The work stayed hard, but the men walked easier. They cursed less. They came early for supper and stayed after to haul wood or carry water without complaint. Laughter began to live in corners that had stayed empty for years. Emma's small voice floated through the yard. Grown men tipped their hats to her, as if she were ranch royalty. Her giggles cut across the dust and sank into Silas like clean rain. But he also noticed the shadows in May. She never sat with her back to a door. She flinched when boots hit the porch too fast. Every evening her eyes went to the far horizon, as if she knew trouble had a habit of coming from a long way off. One night, after supper was cleared and the men had gone to the bunkhouse, Silas leaned in the kitchen doorway while May wiped down the table. He asked if this place was only a stop on her road, or if she could see herself staying. May kept wiping for a moment, then set the cloth aside. She said most of her life had been spent leaving, but this time she was trying to run toward something instead of just away. She told him she wanted a bit of ground where Emma could grow without shame, and where her own work counted for more than someone else's debt. Silas told her that on Crow Ranch, a person earned wages for work and respect for effort, and no one would dig in her past unless she offered it. Something eased in her shoulders. Not all the fear, but some of it. For May Wilder, that nod was the closest thing to a promise he had ever seen. Neither of them knew it yet, but the first hard test of that new fragile peace was already on its way over the same horizon she watched every night. For the first time in years, both of them felt the future lean a little closer towards something kinder. By the time the ranch slipped into a new rhythm, it felt like Crow Ranch had been holding its breath for years and was finally learning how to breathe again. Mornings began with the clatter of pans and the smell of real coffee instead of burned beans. Men came into the yard with shirts tucked and faces washed because Miss May was cooking, and no one wanted to insult that miracle. That was when the first hard test hit. The morning Tom went down, May stood at the big table, working bread dough under her hands. Emma slept in the cradle by the stove, one small fist pressed against her cheek. A shout broke the quiet. "Silas, get over here! Something is wrong with Tom!" May's head came up. She wiped her hands on her apron, checked Emma with a quick glance, then stepped into the yard. Tom was on his knees between the barn and the bunkhouse, one arm locked around his middle, the other braced in the dirt. His face had gone the color of ashes. Jack and Billy hovered nearby. Silas knelt beside him, steady but tight around the eyes. "What hurts, Tom?" Silas asked. "Everything," came the rough answer. "Stomach on fire. Can't breathe right." May dropped to the other side of him. She did not waste words. She pressed her fingers to his wrist, counted the wild jump of his pulse, then set the back of her hand against his forehead. Too fast. Too hot. Not from the sun. She asked when it started, what he had eaten, if anyone else felt sick. Tom rasped that he had eaten what everyone ate, and that he had hoped to work through it. Her gaze slid to his hands, rough, scarred, all the same as every man on the place, except for the cut on his thumb, wrapped in a filthy strip of cloth. The skin around it was swollen, angry red, with a faint line creeping up his wrist. May felt her stomach go cold. "Billy," she said, "bring me water as hot as you can make it. Jack, go to the cookhouse." On the top shelf by the herbs is a small wooden box with bandages, a knife, and a bottle that smells like tar and strong liquor. "Bring that box and the whiskey jug." They ran. She turned to Silas. "This is not bad food," she said quietly. "The wound on his thumb has gone septic. The poison is in his blood." "Can you fix it?" he asked. "If we do nothing, he will be dead before the week is out. If I do what I know, he has a chance." When Jack and Billy came back with the basin, the box, and the whiskey, May poured whiskey over her hands and over the small knife. She unwrapped the dirty rag from Tom's thumb. The smell that rose made even Silas flinch. She told Tom the truth. She would have to open the wound and clean it. It would hurt worse than anything he had ever felt. If he wanted to live, he had to let her do it. His eyes met hers. Fear and trust twisted together. Then he nodded. Silas braced Tom's arm. Jack and Billy pinned his shoulders and legs. May folded a strip of clean cloth and pushed it between Tom's teeth. "All right," she said. "Hold him." The first cut dragged a muffled sound from his throat. The next pulled a full scream that bit through the cloth. Birds flew from the mesquite trees. May did not stop. She widened the cut, worked her fingers in the knife to push out thick tainted blood and pus. She rinsed it with whiskey, then squeezed until more poison came. Her face had gone pale, but her hands did not shake. When she finished, she packed the open wound with a paste of crushed herbs from her box, then bound it tight in clean cloth. "Get him to his bunk," May said. "Keep him flat. I will brew a tea for fever and pain. He must drink it every few hours. The bandage must be changed twice a day. I will show you how." "You will do it," Silas answered. "I have a kitchen to run and a baby to tend," May said. "I cannot be in two places at once. You can change a bandage if I show you." "Then I will mind Emma," Silas said simply. "You take care of Tom." That stopped her for a heartbeat. Then she nodded and turned back to the stove. She built another fire, measured out bark and flowers from the jars she had brought, and made a dark, bitter brew. At the bunkhouse, she forced spoon after spoon between Tom's lips until he swallowed. She made Jack repeat every step of cleaning and wrapping the wound. When she stepped back into the cookhouse, she found Silas in the rocking chair he never used. Emma lay against his chest, small head tucked under his chin, one tiny hand fisted in his shirt. He rocked her in slow circles, humming something low and tuneless. The hard lines of his face had softened in a way she had never seen. She told him Tom would likely live if the fever broke, and the red streak did not climb higher. She would keep checking through the day and the night. Silas nodded. "Watching a baby for an hour is nothing," he said. "What you did out there is something else." He handed Emma back. May kissed her daughter's hair and thanked him, the word rough in her throat. That night the bunkhouse lamps burned late. By dawn, The fever had eased. By the second day, the red line had shrunk instead of spread. Miss May had cut into a man's hand to drag death out of him. Respect turned into something heavier. The men began to look at her the way they looked at fresh water in dry country, something you guarded. For Silas, the change ran deeper. He had hired a cook. What he had gotten was a woman who could hold a ranch together with her bare hands. A week later, the land itself decided to test her. A week later, the land turned hard. No clouds, no real wind, just white sky and sun beating down day after day. The pond dropped. The creek in the south pasture thinned. Grass turned brittle. Cattle moved slow, heads low. Silas spent long days riding fence and counting weak calves. Each night he came back with dust in his hair and more weight in his eyes. May felt the drought in her kitchen. She stretched beans with less bacon, cut biscuits smaller, slipped more greens into stews. The men still rose from the table full, but they saw how careful she was with every scoop of flour. One morning, while Emma kicked on a blanket by the back step, May knelt beside the small herb patch near the cookhouse wall. The plants closest to the house looked too alive for such dry days. When she pushed her fingers into the dirt, it felt cool. She dug deeper and found damp earth. She followed that damp line along the back of the cookhouse to a shallow dip. There the soil was wetter still. When Silas came in from checking the herd, she met him and told him what she had found. He knelt where she pointed, dug with his hands, and brought up dark mud. He studied the yard and said there might be a small spring under there. He called for shovels. The men dug a pit where May pointed. Soon clear water gathered at the bottom, slow but steady, not enough to save the herd, but enough for the garden and chickens, and maybe a milk cow later, in a dry year that felt like grace. For a few days, hope moved through the place. May planted more beans and squash. The men joked again. Silas still watched the sky, but the deep line between his brows eased. That was when the riders came. May was snapping beans on the porch, while Emma banged wooden spoons together at her feet. Hoofbeats rolled in from the gate, fast and sure. 3 men rode through without waiting to be called. The one in front wore a dark coat too fine for dust and work. His hat was clean, his boots shone. The 2 behind him had hard eyes and loose gun belts, the look of men hired for trouble. Silas stepped down from the main house porch, wiping his hands on a rag. Tom and Jack drifted into the yard, not close, but not far either. May picked up Emma and stood in the cookhouse doorway where she could see and hear. The man in the coat called Silas by name and said he worked for the hotel in Redemption. He said May Wilder had walked out owing room, board, and pay. He held up folded papers and talked about contracts and legal debts. Then he named a number so high it made May's stomach twist. Before she could stop herself, she stepped out onto the porch. Her voice came out steady. She said she had taken nothing from that hotel but her baby and her clothes. She had worked every day, yet the marks in the ledger only climbed. When the owner started hinting that there were other ways she could settle what he claimed she owed, she had left. The coat man smiled without warmth. He said her mark in the book counted as a binding deal. According to his figures, she still owed months of work. She could ride back with them and finish it, or Silas could pay the sum in cash. Silas asked how much. When the man repeated the figure, Silas said it was theft dressed up on paper. He said May worked for him now, earning wages for work, and she was not leaving his land against her will. Tom's hand settled on the stock of his rifle. Jack's jaw tightened. The hired guns shifted in their saddles, measuring the distance to cover. The man in the coat warned that blocking a lawful debt could bring the marshal and judge down on Crow Ranch. He said this was not finished. Silas did not move. He told him that anyone who came back to drag a woman off his place should be ready to face more than one barrel. The 3 strangers read the yard and the faces in it. Pride fought with sense in the coat man's eyes. In the end, sense won. He tucked his papers away, turned his horse, and rode out, leaving dust and a tight kind of quiet behind him. This was not the old dead silence Crow Ranch knew. It was sharp and waiting, like air right before lightning. May's knees went weak. Silas caught her and Emma both. She told him they would be back, and that next time they would not bluff. She said she should leave before they ruined his ranch over her. Silas told her no. He said he had already lost one woman to a fight he could not win, and he would not stand still and let fear take another. She had walked into his life and turned a graveyard of a house into something living again. He was not giving that up. That night, May could not sleep. Every creak sounded like boots on the porch. Emma felt the fear in her and cried more than usual. Near midnight came a soft knock on the cookhouse door. Silas called through that it was him and asked to come in. They sat at the little table with the lamp turned low. May wrapped her hands around a cup just to feel something solid. The words came slow at first, then faster. She told him how her father had traded her at 16 to clear a card loss. How her first husband had treated her like property. How the hotel owner had smiled and written numbers in a book that she could never pay down. She said she would not belong to any man again, not to a cheat in town, and not to a good one on a ranch. She said she could not bear the thought of being bought, even in kindness. Silas listened without looking away. When she was done, he told her he did not see a burden when he looked at her. He saw the reason his bunkhouse was full, his men stayed, and Tom was alive. He saw the spring she had found, and the way the ranch no longer felt like a tomb. He said he would ride to town at first light and speak to Sheriff Coleman, a man he trusted. They would find out what was real in those papers, and what was lies. If there was any honest debt, they would face it on fair ground. If there was not, they would stand together. Fear still sat heavy in May's chest, but something else settled beside it. A slow, careful trust that scared her in a different way. All her life, trouble had been hers alone to carry. For the first time, someone else was saying we instead of you. At dawn, Silas saddled his horse and rode toward redemption with his jaw set and a folded list in his pocket. From the porch, with Emma on her hip and the new spring whispering behind the cookhouse, May watched him go, knowing the next knock on their door could bring either peace or the fight of their lives. Silas rode into redemption, with the sun barely up and his temper already hot. He went straight to Sheriff Coleman, a solid man with gray in his beard and lines around his eyes that came from seeing too much and still trying to do right. Coleman listened while Silas laid it all out, May's months at the hotel, the growing ledger that never went down, the visit from the lawyer with the clean boots and dirty papers, the threat to drag her off Crow Ranch. When Silas finished, Sheriff Coleman rubbed his jaw and said that the hotel owner had a reputation that smelled bad, even from the jailhouse. He said some of what the lawyer claimed might be legal on paper, but a lot of it sounded crooked at the roots. The sheriff told Silas that a circuit judge would be coming through in 2 weeks. If May could hold on that long, they could bring the whole mess in front of someone with the power to shut it down. 2 weeks felt like forever, but it was something. Back at the ranch, May listened with Emma on her hip and fear in her eyes. Silas told her they would stand it together. He said the men would keep watch, and nobody would take her anywhere she did not choose to go. For a few days, nothing happened. The men worked with rifles close at hand. May cooked with one leaned in the corner of the cookhouse. At night, someone always sat awake on the porch while the others slept. Emma felt the tightness in the air and woke often, crying until May walked her in slow circles. Trouble came back on the 5th day. 4 riders this time. No clean coat. No smiling lawyer. These men looked like they had been paid for something rough. The oldest had a scar through one eyebrow and a way of sitting his horse that said he was not afraid of guns pointed his way. He said his name was Garrett and that he worked for men in town who wanted what was owed. He said May Wilder had signed on for 6 months of labor and had given less than half. He told Silas the hotel wanted the rest of her time, not just her money. Silas said the debt was settled on the money side and that no one owned May's time but May. Garrett said the ledger counted. He said it did not matter what May wanted. Tom stepped out of the barn with his rifle resting on his arm. Jack appeared near the corral. Billy came from the bunkhouse with a shotgun that was almost too big for him, but his hands did not shake much. May stood on the cookhouse steps with Emma tucked close and her heart trying to pound out of her chest. Garrett rested his hand on his gun and told May she could ride with him quiet or be tied over a saddle. He said Silas could not win this. Silas did not reach for his pistol. He still held the hammer he had been using on a broken rail. He told Garrett that if anyone tried to lay a hand on May, they would cross a line they would not walk back from. For one long breath, the yard froze. Then Garrett moved. His hand dropped toward his gun. Silas swung the hammer. It caught Garrett hard along the jaw and dropped him sideways. One of the other men jerked his pistol free, but Tom's rifle cracked a heartbeat later. The bullet hit the dirt near the man's boot, close enough to kick dust up his pant leg. Tom said in a calm voice that the next shot would not miss. Jack and Billy brought their guns up. Now 4 barrels stared at 4 strangers, and nobody could pretend this was a friendly visit. Garrett pushed himself up, blood on his lip and fury in his eyes. He said this would bring the law down on Crow Ranch. He said they would be back with proper papers and a marshal at their side. Silas said they could come with whoever they liked. He said the answer would still be no. They rode out, but May knew in her bones that this was not finished. That night the men kept watch in pairs. May did not sleep at all. Near dawn, with Emma finally resting, Silas came to the cookhouse and sat across from her. He told her quietly that if she wanted to run, he would not stop her. He said he would help her get as far as she wanted to go. May looked at her sleeping child. Then she looked at Silas. At the men outside, willing to stand between her and danger. At the small home she had carved out of grease and flour and long days. She said she was done running. She said if these men wanted to take her, they could face her standing on her own ground with people who cared beside her. Silas nodded once. Something proud moved behind his tired eyes. The judge came sooner than anyone expected. 3 days later, Sheriff Coleman rode in with another man, wearing a simple coat and wire-rimmed spectacles. The stranger's hair was more white than gray, but his back was straight and his eyes were sharp. Coleman said this was Judge Patterson and that he had agreed to hear the matter right there on the ranch. They sat at the kitchen table in the cookhouse. May told her story again, this time from the very beginning. Her mark in the ledger. The way numbers grew no matter how she worked. The offers and threats. The nights she lay awake knowing she would never be free if she stayed. Silas laid out the visits from the lawyer and from Garrett, the false debt, the threats to drag her away. Judge Patterson listened without interrupting. Then he asked a few quiet questions that cut straight to the heart of things. When he was done, he said that what the hotel owner had been doing was closer to selling people than hiring them. He said no mark in any book could make that right. He wrote out an order there at May's table, ink scratching across paper while her hands shook. The order said that any contract the hotel claimed over May Wilder was void. It said no one had the right to take her from Crow Ranch for debt or labor. It warned that anyone who tried would face contempt of court and jail besides. Sheriff Coleman took the official copy into town that same afternoon. Word spread fast. The hotel owner, who had once walked the streets of Redemption like he owned them, suddenly found himself on the wrong side of a man with the power to lock him up. Within a week, he closed his doors and left town on a night train. For May, the change came like a fever breaking. The first evening after Coleman brought back word, she made fried chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, biscuits and pie, not because she had to. Because she wanted to feel what it was like to cook a celebration instead of a last meal. The men ate until they were full and then kept eating. Laughter rolled across the yard. The air felt lighter, like a weight none of them had spoken of was gone. When the dishes were washed and Emma asleep in her cradle, Silas stayed behind in the quiet kitchen. He stood by the window for a minute, then turned and faced May. He told her that when she first walked through his gate, he had thought he was hiring hands and a skillet. He said he had not understood that she would bring his ranch back to life, heal his men, save his cattle, and crack open the stone he had wrapped around his own heart. He said he loved her, plain and simple. May's breath came shallow. She said she did not know how to be anything but wary. She had spent her whole life being traded and owned and afraid. She said love had always come with chains. Silas stepped closer but kept his hands at his sides. He told her he was not asking for chains. He was asking for a chance. He said she was free now in the eyes of the law, and he would never take that from her. He only wanted to stand beside her if she chose it. Silence filled the room, but it was the kind that waited, not the kind that crushed. May thought of Emma, of the men who watched her like she was everyone's little sister, of the spring behind the cookhouse and the garden that had risen from dry earth, of the way her shoulders had slowly lowered over the weeks, how she had slept more deeply with each night that passed. She told Silas that she was scared, deeply, truly scared, but she also told him she did not want to leave. She said she wanted to see what could grow if she stayed. Days turned to weeks. Spring softened into summer. Silas did not press. He worked beside her, laughed with Emma, listened when she wanted to talk, and kept quiet when she did not. One evening, under a spreading oak at the edge of the property, with the sky burning gold and purple, he asked her again, not as a demand, as a simple question. He asked if she would be his partner in truth, not just his cook, his equal, his wife. Her first marriage had been a trade made over a card table. This felt nothing like that. May took his hands in hers. She felt the scars, the strength, the patience. She heard Emma's small voice behind them playing in the grass, safe and loud and free. She said yes. They were married right there a few weeks later, with Sheriff Coleman saying the words and the men as witnesses. May wore a dress she had sewn from the blue cloth Silas once bought for baby clothes. Emma scattered wildflowers she barely held on to. The vows were plain, and the promises were real. That night, in a small new room Silas had built onto the cookhouse, May lay beside him, Emma asleep in a cradle at the foot of their bed. She listened to his steady breathing and realized something simple and shattering. For the first time in her life, she belonged somewhere because she had chosen it, not because someone had claimed her. The ranch still had hard days. Cattle still got sick. Fences still broke. Storms still came without warning. But now the quiet at Crow Ranch was different. It was the silence of a home at rest, not a house in mourning. Silas Crow, once a widower buried in his own grief, had found laughter again in a baby's cry and a strong woman's sharp gaze. May Wilder, once a desperate single mother running from debts and danger, had found a place where her skills, her courage, and her heart mattered. Together they built a life where Emma's first memory would not be fear, but the sound of coffee boiling on a stove and her parents talking low in a kitchen filled with warmth. Crow Ranch still sat out there against the Texas horizon, hard and stubborn as ever. But now, when the wind moved through the grass and cattle called in the distance, another sound lived in the spaces between. The soft, healing silence of people who had survived their worst days and chosen each other anyway.